Hi everyone, welcome to Bonnie Carolee Makes Cards. This series of 8 cards features elements from 3 different stamp sets by Simon Says Stamp: Stronger Together, Beautiful Day, and Somewhere Over the Rainbows. The backgrounds for these cards are ink blended using Tailored Expressions masking stencils. I love the etched alignment guides that are on these stencils that allow you to create a precise center for your open space. To hold the stencil in place, I use Pixie Spray, which is a light tack repositionable adhesive. 2 cards are created with each of the 4 masking stencil sets. For each of the 4 cards that are using the inner portion of the stencil, I hold the outer portion in place with a paper clip to use it as a template. The cutout is then held in place with Pixie Spray ready for ink blending. I began this set of cards by blending all of the backgrounds. The same colors were used for each pair of cards. I worked on Strathmore's Bristol Smooth cardstock. For the 2 cards using the circle stencils, I used Distress Oxide inks, Black Soot, Chipped Sapphire, Seedless Preserves, and Antique Linen. Mermaid Lagoon, Peacock Feathers, and Bundled Sage were used on the rectangle stenciled cards. For the square stencil cards, I used Festive Berries, Wilted Violet, and Squeeze Lemonade. Black Soot, Walnut Stain, and Antique Linen were used on the oval stenciled cards. For this last pair of cards, I did do some additional stenciling. Using Simon Says Stamp's Waves stencil, I applied Faber-Castell Glass Bead Glitter Gel. The counterpart for this card was done after the stamping was completed, and you'll see that later in the video. With the backgrounds complete, I work on the cards in pairs. This first set uses stamps from Beautiful Day and Somewhere Over the Rainbow. I begin by stamping using Simon Says Stamp's Intense Black ink. This is a very versatile ink and can be used for Copic coloring and for watercolor. For the first card, I used the 2 big blooms from Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Before stamping the second flower, I masked the first one so that they could overlap one another. I also used sticky note tape to mask off the bottom of the card where it was ink blended. I did not want the stems of the flowers to extend into this area. One of the stems wasn't quite long enough, so I aligned the stamp with that stem to stamp that portion. I knew I wanted to use Nouveau drops as an accent for this pair of cards. For some design, it is more obvious than others where the Nouveau drop should be applied. I knew I was going to struggle with this particular card. By applying the Nouveau drops onto my craft mat and letting them dry, I then had the flexibility of putting my accents on the card and moving them around until I liked what I saw. Before beginning my Copic coloring, I stamped the second card using images from Beautiful Day. The trail line from the main butterfly was stamped as an afterthought. I did not want the dotted line to go through the sentiment, so I had to do some positioning by using my MISTI. The stamp was flexible and this was easy to do. The same Copic colors were used for each of these 2 cards. For the flowers and the main butterfly, I used BG 49, 72, 75, and 78. I also used a little bit of B02 and 04 for highlight areas. For the center of the flower, I used Y13 and Y18. I also did some stippling using W9 and W10. The stippling added some nice texture to the center of the flower. The coloring for both of these cards was easy and fairly quick. I almost always start my coloring by working from darkest to lightest. Many people color lightest to darkest, and I think either way is fine. It's really a matter of personal preference. The butterfly was colored section by section. When the coloring was complete, I used white Blizzard Nouveau drops and painted the entire butterfly. I also added some additional detail with the Nouveau drops using black and Caribbean Ocean. The Nouveau drops that were applied to my craft mat were left to dry for a couple of hours. Initially, I was going to use 2 different colors, but ended up just using the Caribbean Ocean. When I was finished adding these details to both cards, I felt like something was missing on the butterfly card, and I ended up adding a 3rd butterfly silhouette to the top left-hand corner. This small addition seemed to add the balance that I was looking for. For the pair of cards that use the square stencils for the background, I used 2 different stamp sets from Simon Says Stamp, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and Stronger Together. The background was ink blended using Festive Berries, Wilted Violet, and Squeeze Lemonade. The images for both of these cards were stamped using Versamark ink and embossed with gold. Before embossing, I made sure that my backgrounds were completely dry. I tested by putting a little bit of embossing powder over the inked area to make sure that it would not stick. I still ended up with a few stray bits of embossing powder, which you saw me brush off. I do need to use my anti-static powder tool more consistently. After the floral spray was stamped and embossed, I lined up the sentiment from Somewhere Over the Rainbows. As was the floral spray, the sentiment was embossed twice. I use this technique often of double and sometimes even triple embossing. I like the little bit of added dimension that it provides. But more importantly, I end up with a nice, smooth, embossed finish. Another tip for ensuring that you have nice, smooth embossing is to hold the heat on much longer than it takes to melt the embossing powder. To color this image, I used 3 Arteza brush pens, red, light magenta, and rosewood. This image was painted very simply. The color was brushed on at the base of each flower petal and leaf. A water brush pen pulled that color out, providing a nice gradient of tone. Painting embossed images goes very quickly. For the second card, I began by stamping the sentiment. I used the same ink colors that were used in the blended background. I then stamped this simple but beautiful floral stem with Versamark ink. Following the same process I used in the first card, this image was embossed 2 times. The flower stem was painted exactly the same way in the very same colors. Of course, the image in this card was even faster to paint than the previous one. Both of these cards fit into the category quick and easy. When choosing the colors for the images in both of these cards, I tried to pick up the violet and red tones that were in the background. Each of the panels were attached to A2 size card bases that were made from Nina Solar White 110 pound cardstock. I used a little bit of double-sided tape to hold the cards flat while I put on the embellishments. The tape is easily removed by simply rolling it off with my finger. For these 2 cards, I chose a sequin mix that matched the colors that were used in the floral images. After the sequins were adhered to the cards, I reached for my Crystal Nouveau Drops Morning Dew. A good-sized drop was placed in the depression of each of the sequins. The Morning Dew drop dries clear, and combined with the sequin, this makes a very rich and beautiful embellishment. The circled stenciled cards feature images and sentiments from Stronger Together and Beautiful Day. The blended ink backgrounds were created with black soot, chipped sapphire, seedless preserves, and antique linen. This pair of cards was created in much the same way as the square stenciled cards shown previously. The leafy images and sentiments for both cards were stamped with Versamark ink and embossed in gold 2 times. In the first card, I used a branch from Beautiful Day. In this card, I chose one from Stronger Together. After stamping and embossing both the image and the sentiment, I felt like something was still missing. I decided to extend the branch deeper into the circle by stamping another smaller leafy image. I used a little bit of Post-it note tape to mask off one of the leaves before stamping. This tape is one of my essentials in my craft room. It is quick and easy to use for a small masking job such as this one. After this small add-on image has been embossed twice, I'm ready to move on to painting. For this pair of cards, I'll be working with my Arteza Real Brush markers. The leaves will be colored with a combination of red, light magenta, and rosewood. I chose Strathmore's Bristol Smooth cardstock for all of the panels in this series of cards. Not only is this the perfect cardstock for creating an ink-blended background, but it also can withstand a little bit of water, making it a very good choice when working with real brush pens. The clean lines and the repetition of the images make this very quick to color. Both of these cards were embellished with Nouveau Crystal Drops Violet Galaxy. The drops were tucked in and around the leaves and the sentiment just to add that little extra something special. The final pair of cards uses images from Simon Says Stamps Stronger Together. After stamping the floral image with the Copic-friendly Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink, I'm ready to color. Because the background was created using black soot, walnut stain, and antique linen, I wanted to stick to a very muted color palette. For the leaves, I chose a family of gray greens, BG 90, 93, 96, and 99. Working darkest to lightest, the leaves were colored quickly. For the flower petals, I chose something a little unusual, brown tones, E42, 44, and 49. Unlike the other cards in this series that use very vivid colors, I wanted this pair of cards to be more subdued and soft. The colors used for both the petals and the leaves were harmonious with the background. The stenciling over the dark portion of the blended background almost had a green hue to it that was very similar to the green-gray of the leaves. I created a second panel for my sentiment by blending antique linen and walnut stain. After this small panel was completely dry, I stamped and embossed it twice with gold embossing powder. This small panel was trimmed down and then mounted on matte gold cardstock. I used foam adhesive squares on the back of this small panel for dimension. Before attaching the sentiment, I adhered the panel to an A2 size card base. For the second card, I used the tall leafy stem image from Stronger Together. Being consistent with all the other embossed images in this series, this card was also stamped and embossed 2 times. This card was colored with the same green markers as the first card, BG 90, 93, 96, and 99. Working darkest to lightest, I colored all the leaves at once. I saw another card on Instagram where the stems were completely colored in for this image. I decided to try it out. I'm not completely sure that I liked it on my card, but I was planning to do some more stenciling which I hoped would soften the overall look. The panel was stenciled with Simon Says Stamps Raindrops. As in the other card, I used Faber-Castell's Glass Bead Glitter Gel. The gel dries clear and has a very subtle appearance. I used a great tool by Tonic Studios to apply this gel. I was able to easily avoid the sentiment area. In keeping with the earth tones, I chose Nouveau Crystal Drops Dark Walnut to embellish these cards. The drops were used to further highlight the leafy and floral images. That wraps up this series of 8 cards featuring Simon Says Stamps, Stronger Together, Beautiful Day, and Somewhere Over the Rainbows, all on backgrounds using Tailored Expressions set of masking stencils. I appreciate your visit. Until next time, stay safe and stay healthy.